All right, so let's now talk about the dynamic bonding curves. Now, what is the problem with the normal bonding curves? So imagine that if you bought a lot of tokens in a bonding curve early and you continue to hold them, you can essentially hold a large portion of the total supply. And since you've bought it early, you'll be most probably buying it at a very cheap price. And you can continue to hold this indefinitely if you do not end up selling your tokens. On the contrary, if you bought in the tokens late, you would basically never be able to compete with the people who were essentially early adopters, and they bought a large portion of the token, which were then held by them because they were just not selling it. Unless, obviously, you buy at a very high price. Now, if we just look at this in our normal bonding curve, we essentially see the same pattern. So imagine if somebody bought a huge amount, minted a huge supply at the start of the bonding curve or at the start of any project and just continue to hold them. And as the price increased to a certain level, they just sold all of their tokens and took a huge money out and profited. Similarly, if there was a buying and a selling curve function, this could be mitigated to a certain extent because obviously there is a difference between the buy and the sell price. So the effect of dropping the price suddenly or selling all of your tokens at a very high price kind of reduces when you have a bonding curve like this. Another problem with the bonding curves is that you have your normal bonding curves. And obviously, you've got your governance mechanisms as well, which are governing the internal ecosystem and that are also looking at the outside ecosystem and then changing the governance laws within the ecosystem. So, with the normal bonding curves, which are not dynamic and they're quite static, it's either a straight line or it's a fixed function that does not change based on the market dynamics. And in a real world, obviously, there's real market, there's real market dynamics. And your ecosystem gets influenced by those real market dynamics. So in a normal bonding curve, obviously those things don't exist. And with the changing circumstances outside your ecosystem or within the ecosystem, if you want to change a live bonding curve, it will cause massive disruption and it will be super hard to implement. So this is where obviously your bonding curves come into play. So that's one more problem that we have with the normal bonding curves, and which is where then the dynamic bonding curve basically comes into play. This is exactly where the dynamic bonding curve comes to our rescue, which is where we have different prices based on different times of the curve or different times of the project people bought or people sold their tokens. So the idea behind a dynamic bonding curve is quite simple and straightforward. It basically creates the effect that if we could create a curve that used a function which was basically based on the activity that the token holder was doing. So if the token holder was regularly buying tokens, his activity is inside the ecosystem and he's an active member of the ecosystem. Whereas if a token holder just buys at the start and then just continues to hold, he is an inactive member of the ecosystem, which basically reduces the price of his token over time. And this is, for now, to understand very simply put in a function that the current price of token at any time is calculated by the number of tokens divided by the total supply of tokens. So for instance, when you bought in early, obviously your total supply was very low and you bought in a lot of tokens. But as time passes, this token supply, the total supply of the token, this supply goes up, which means that if you continue to hold your tokens, the price of your tokens eventually would reduce. This is better explained with the help of an actual dynamic bonding curve. So now imagine there is a person called person A, and he came in very early, so he bought the tokens at a specific price and he minted a few tokens. Now, over time, as this person continues to hold the token, the price, because the supply of the token continues to increase on the x-axis, over time, if this person continues to hold his token, his price is essentially going to drop. because the total supply of the tokens that he has increases. On the other hand, now let's say there is this person, person B, who continues to buy tokens consistently. So let's say on the 5th of every day or once every month, he buys a fixed amount of tokens. The portion of the supply slowly increases as they continue to buy more tokens. So this person B is continuing to buy more tokens at a very fixed interval. So this is important that he's buying it at a very fixed interval. So this is how the graph of person B would look like. Now imagine another third user of the system who buys it at different times. So he's not buying it at a fixed time, but he buys it at very different times. So what is the effect generally of this bonding curve? Let's just go back to our formula. So now imagine that you got in early and you hold a large portion of the supply. Then buying new tokens, so remember buying new tokens basically means that since you hold a large portion of the token supply and you want to buy new tokens, then that would be very expensive. However, if you sell your tokens, you will receive a much higher price because you hold a large number of tokens, and obviously there is a token supply when you sell your tokens. So this divided by this value will give you a higher value if you sell your tokens. However, if you hold a small portion of the total supply, then buying more tokens becomes very cheap. So now let's say you have a small portion of this token supply and you want to buy more tokens. So number of tokens divided by token supply would enable you to buy more tokens. So this kind of incentivizes people who are coming into the ecosystem and also ensures that the people who are already there in the ecosystem continue to reinvest back into the ecosystem or continue to rotate their assets, their investments inside the ecosystem so that everybody continues to profit. This is how a dynamic bonding curves operate. We will see practical examples of these dynamic bonding curves in more later discussions. But if you get this basic concept, you should be all well on your way to understanding dynamic bonding curves.